They don't have to build it themselves, but they must take the responsibility for project management. Once the project is up and running, sell it down to the private sector and recoup the money. And actually, they'll make a lot of profit. This is actually how the Mumbai Pune Expressway was made. It was a public project which then sold down. Why can't we replicate that at scale? So on energy, NTPC today is managing 40% of the operating capacity of our power plants in the country. NTPC is a Maharatna. They have proven execution capacity. Why can't NTPC be persuaded to sell a good chunk of this operating capacity to private investors who will willingly invest because they'll get a predictable rate of return on this? Canadian pension funds will invest and buy operating, running assets that NTPC can continue to manage, but the ownership of the asset will lie with the investor. Those funds that the NTPC gets should be used to develop new capacity. Instead, what we are focusing on is how can we privatize NTPC? I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. The only sad part of what you talked is you created such a burdensome atmosphere for doing infrastructure. But I think you said this in the hope of saying that this is the mindset, this is the place where we are. Now we're going to break through this, and perhaps this is the way forward. And I think that's what is a wonderful takeaway from what you say. But I do want to have a little difference of opinion with you. It is not universal suffrage that demanded redistributive policies. It is Nehru's completely in love with the Russian model of command economy, which brought central planning, which meant the resources of this country will be decided where they will go only by the state. That is the reason why you have a dairy in today's time on Worli Seaface, a public property which can be sold to build a huge infrastructure of Bombay, and I'll show you many such places. So that was a mindset where government had complete control of the economy that created this situation. Redistributive justice exists, even now will exist, but by Modi's, by doing away with Planning Commission, a signal that the state will no longer decide where the allocation of resources, including your services and mine, but that it would now be dictated by the needs of society. And I think this is a big change that's coming about, and therefore will help in a greater way once the first stage of privatization, as you recommend, because I support that style, because that's get rid of all the construction cost, construction risks, get rid of all the risks which are required to do these things. And once they are done, then you sell it out and generate the money to do the same thing again. I think it's a very good idea, but I think having done away with Planning Commission, I think the air is clear. The minds may not yet be clear, but the air is clear to move forward. And there is one more feature that happened in India. Unlike the states, United States, the states created the federal government, the union. It's our union that created the states. But the same states that created the federal government also created city governments and district governments. We do not have city governments. Local self-governments for cities, which are autonomous, are not there. How much can an urban development minister, particularly places like Maharashtra, where he is also the chief minister for several years, deal with the 200 cities and the infrastructure they require or anything they require in real time effectively? Virtually impossible. A bypass around Nagpur, a filtration plant for Ratnagiri, or a flyover in Pune, how do you deal with all that? So we need to have local self-governments, which will then form better public-private partnership, as we have seen anywhere else in the world. So in that context, not having local self-governments has been a big setback, where the state government determines almost everything that happens in every little village and every little town. So I think this is also another area we need to look at. If we want smart cities, they will have to be cities that will demand the smartness.
Thank you, sir. This was quite interesting keynote. And just for the interest of the audience, I would like to introduce you. Dr. Lal is Executive Chairman of IDFC, and his expertise lies in project finance, project equity, venture capital, macroeconomic policies, and he also writes regular column in Business Standard. He also represents G20 Work Group of Infrastructure, Chairman of Infrastructure in World Economic Forum, and he is a member of City of London's Advisory Council of India. Thank you, sir, for your keynote speech. I would like to now invite, thank you, a word of applause from him. I would like to invite now Professor Kirti Ramamrutham, PhD in Computer Science from University of Utah in 1981, Faculty of University of Massachusetts, Faculty of Computer Science, IIT Mumbai, currently Head of Center of Urban Science and Engineering, IIT Mumbai. He is also a Fellow of IEEE and ACM. His research interest lies in smart grid, informatics, energy management in buildings. Professor Ram.
Good afternoon. If I don't know about you, but I can keep on listening to his talk. So I would have loved to be there, sitting down and hear more on this topic that you covered. Very fascinating. But as your luck would have it, or mine, we'll have to go on and listen to two more talks of a different kind from technologists. So it'll be a different perspective. And I'm going to ask the question, which has been bugging me for a long time, ever since I started hearing the word smart with almost everything that you and I touch. Smartphones, smart this, smart that, smart cities now, smart energy, smart everything. So in the context of today's conference, the question I'm asking is, what is really needed to make smart cities, what we call as smart cities, truly smart? So that begs the question, what is the attribute that we all want to associate with, or we think should be attached to the term smart when we say smart cities? And so what I did was crowdsourcing. All of you know crowdsourcing, right? Cities are all about crowdsourcing, as it turns out, because we want to respond to citizens' needs as the cities evolve. So I did a bunch of crowdsourcing exercises and came up with these keywords. Quick on the uptake, you all know what that means: fast, rapid, swift, live. You can read it as well as I can read out. Important is to see that there is the term intelligent, which is a synonym for smart, able, savvy, perceptive. I'm sure there are some keywords that you would like to add to this. Send me email, I'll do that. But the important point to make here is that there are a lot of attributes that we want to associate with the term smart. I don't know to what extent the people who are developing the design of smart cities at different levels of the government take these into account. So I also went to Wikipedia, which is becoming sort of the source of all knowledge, if you will. And that is pointing out a slightly different perspective of smart cities, which is more focused on the digital aspect of smart cities. Okay? And if this is perhaps also the operational definition, if you look at the smart city document that's coming out of various government sources. It seems to have the feeling that if you throw hardware at things, put sensors, put boxes of all kinds, especially from vendors who have various considerations besides citizens' quality of life in their minds, throw these boxes at the problem and it'll get solved. Fortunately, there's a last sentence which I included here, which says the smart city should be able to respond faster to city and global challenges than a simple transactional relationship. What that means is that it should have a larger perspective of citizens' problems and solve them in a holistic way. So let's ask a question here. In our context that we're sitting in, we have an auditorium, right? And this auditorium, fortunately, is more filled than the picture that I show you there, which is much sparser in terms of the audience there. But if it was sparse like that, and we had a smart auditorium, what would be the attributes of this auditorium from an energy perspective? take a moment and think about this. What I suggest, I'm giving you one simple example of smartness, is that this auditorium will have a little signage which says, during this talk, if people moved forward from sitting way back where to the front seats, we'll save some energy. The question that you'll ask is, how much energy? Why should I bother, right? And I suppose I say it's 30% energy during the course of this talk, which is the session, hour-and-a-half session. How do we get this number? Now, this number may not mean anything to you because it's an abstract number. So it might be better to translate this in terms of rupees. That, of course, depends on lots of factors, like what's the current rate of 1 unit of power? How did you get this number converted from energy to power and so on, energy to rupees and so on? Even rupees may not turn you on because it's 2 pizzas, right? 100, 600 rupees, so who cares? But if you're an environmentally conscious person, you might be stirred by the fact that 2.5 trees will be cut in the process of you sitting through this talk, this session. And that might stir you if you're in this audience, which is sparse, and move forward. So the point is that smartness has different meanings to different people. And the impact of smartness or being smart on the citizenry also depends on where you're coming from. But it all begs the question, how do you get these numbers? Smartness is about getting these numbers straight. Otherwise, people will lose their belief in being smart and using smart things. So here are the things that we need to get these numbers. We did this analysis not purely in the abstract, but also in terms of going through the details of what is required to get these 3 numbers. How many people are here? What are they doing? Where are they seated? What's the outside temperature? Obviously, the outside temperature is very high. It'll take a lot more cooling effort, and a lot more money will be involved in this, in cooling this room. Temperature variations across this room, for example, when we have a room like this, it's warmer there than here because warmer air has a tendency to move up. Power consumption profile of the space, where is it cooler given the nature of the space? How much power is being used for different seating configurations, and so on. What's the price structure? So you get the point. We have to bring a lot of information together to answer the question and get the numbers that I showed you on the previous slide. This is where information technology and hardware sensors come in. But I just want to take a small pause and reflect on what the previous speaker spoke about, which was very similar to what I'm going to talk to you in the context of hardware and IT, but it still has the notion of sensing and responding. A smart city is, to me, all about sensing the right kind of information. Even though we talk about sensors in the hardware sense for much of what you see in the literature about smart cities, it's also about sensing the need for certain transformations in society by looking at things from the perspective of what has happened in the past, why, and what we need to do to respond to the new needs. So I'm not, even though I'm going to say a few more things in terms of examples from the technology perspective, I wanted to keep in mind that this perspective that I'm going to take you through in the next few minutes is applicable even to the non-technology oriented view of smart cities. Okay? So for example, he talked about looking at how rural India has been the driver of many of the policies for whatever reason, and how we have to respond to it by changing our perspective on that particular viewpoint. So similarly, so what he has done is to sense the situation and give a blueprint or a policy recommendation, if you will, if I can use that word, so that we can become smarter in the way we deploy our resources. Okay, so don't think about this picture I'm going to draw or paint for you to be only technology oriented. It's got perspectives, it has applicability beyond that. But being a technologist, I have to give you technology examples for you to be, for me to make a credible story out of this. Now, why is this hardware perspective becoming very relevant today? Because of this so-called 3-letter word, IoT. How many of you have not heard of IoT? Almost everybody would have seen IoT in some form or the other. IoT stands for Internet of Things. So that obviously means Internet. Things, everything is going to be connected through the Internet. And these are embedded systems, small little things talking to each other, whether they want or not, whether they should or not, causing lots of privacy and other problems. But nevertheless, this has become possible today, and that is why we are talking about smart cities, I feel, in a much more vigorous, much more loud, much more persuasive way than we could 10 years ago. 10 years ago, much of what we're talking about today, like throwing hardware as a problem, will not have been possible. So going back to this question now that I asked in the beginning, this is an infrastructure issue, right? How do you deploy a certain infrastructure in the most cost-conscious, energy-conscious way, taking all information that's available to you at your fingertips through sensors to reduce energy, reduce costs, and so on. So now this leads to the question, what happens between sensing and responding? Now, much of what Dr. Rajiv Lal talked about had an analysis component to it. It was not simply take numbers and give you the numbers as response. He analyzed it for you, analyzed the situation, not in numeric terms, but in terms of philosophy, in terms of direction, in terms of politics and so on, and gave you a response. Right? So this analysis is the most important component of smartness. Without analysis, there will be raw numbers, and raw numbers don't tell the whole story because it's quite a bit hidden underneath. So how do you get this analysis done? Through hardware resources, obviously in the context of numbers coming from sensors, but through analysis like of the kind that we heard before. So we have the job of taking a lot of numbers, taking a subset of them which are meaningful in the context of a particular question we are asking. How do we use this auditorium